Weather Center and our meteorologist, Steve Williams.
It'll be warm today, sunny to partly cloudy skies, high near 89. Partly cloudy tonight, shower and thunderstorm, late low 70. And then for tomorrow, times of clouds and sun, a shower and thunderstorm possible, and the high near 83. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
71 at O'Hare, 74 Lakeside. Your next news update is at 7:30. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by AM Woodland Outdoor Design, luxury outdoor living. amwoodland.com.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. President Trump expected to give a address on the shootings over the weekend at 9 a.m. Chicago time, so we'll have that. We've also heard some more pronouncements from the president about the horrific events in Dayton and El Paso over the weekend. Again, 29 dead, more than 4 dozen injured. By the way, in Chicago, we reported 7 dead, 53 shot over the weekend. Can we include that in our national discussions of mass shootings? Don't you think we should, Charles?
Yeah, I think that not just the numbers being so high that at least 4 of them had we had one that was, I think, 9 shot in one shooting and 7 in another. If that's not mass, I don't know what is.
I mean, it fits the definition that a lot of these statistical outlets use for mass shootings.
I don't know. They changed the definition. They say it must be dead, right? So you can shoot 50 people. It's not a mass shooting if nobody dies.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
That's not illogical.
Yeah, right. The president had this to say over the weekend, reacting shortly after it became public what had happened in Dayton.
I want to extend our condolences to the people of El Paso, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio. They're incredible people, and they've been through a lot. I just want to also thank the law enforcement in both places. The job they've done is incredible. I also want to congratulate them. I mean, nobody could have done what they've done. This could have been as bad as it was. It could have been so much worse.
Yeah, so on the topic of law enforcement in these situations, particularly with respect to the El Paso shooter who had this manifesto, who claimed to be influenced by white supremacist tracts like The Great Replacement, this book by a French white supremacist named Renaud Camus. On the issue of law enforcement, we talked about this with respect to Islamofascism and radical Islamists who are intent on hurting Americans at home and abroad, and what the role is for FBI and perhaps even CIA in terms of intel, because, of course, these are global operators, or radicalization is occurring on a global scale. But in America, with respect to homegrown domestic terrorism, like white supremacy, and Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, has testified about on this topic, Congress before. This was mentioned over the weekend several times. What is there we can do? What is it that law enforcement can do to try and do a better job of identifying individuals who may have violent intentions? For more on that topic, we're pleased to be joined by Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Cullom Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation, author of Wiki at War, as well as Private Sector Public Wars. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, good to be with you.
One of the things that was mentioned in the coverage this weekend, and you had the founder of this website called 8chan essentially call for it to be taken down, is that there are certain places on the web, like apparently this website 8chan, that are gathering places for individuals like this shooter in El Paso. And so I wonder what you think about what the FBI in particular is doing and what more could it be doing when you're talking about monitoring and trying to interdict domestic terrorists?
Well, we ought to explain to people kind of the distinction between how we deal with transnational terrorism and how we deal with domestic terrorism, and the federal role is actually somewhat different. In transnational terrorism, these groups are linked together internationally, and in addition, they have a very specific goal, which essentially is to bring down the United States, attack U.S. targets and its allies. So it becomes a national security problem, and therefore all the instruments of national security are focused on that. And we don't make a distinction between the domestic theater and the international theater, other than the fact that in the domestic theater we have very specific laws and policies that we have to follow, and we respect those. On domestic terrorism, whether it's eco-terrorists who are burning down forests or white supremacists who want to go in a mall and shoot somebody, the model essentially in many ways is flipped. It's public safety is a state and local responsibility. They're really on the front lines of this. The FBI is a backup to that. And the FBI also has a role if somebody has violated federal law. There are many things that a domestic terrorist might do, which might be a violation of federal law, and the FBI would step in. Since the 1980s, if you think back to the Murrah office building attack, which is an act of domestic terrorism by a white supremacist, the FBI has played a prominent role in that. It has joint terrorism task force around the country. There's like 50 plus of them. They deal not just with transnational terrorism, but they also provide support dealing with domestic terrorist threats. And the FBI director recently said that the FBI recognizes it's a significant threat, and they're putting resources against that.
Okay, but I mean, the way that the FBI is putting resources against that is, I mean, I'm still trying to get a sense of, you're describing the culture that's changed, and that's instructive, but then how has it changed in terms of what they're actually doing with respect to the approach to the homegrown terrorists that may be, it sort of like there's no such thing as a lone wolf when you talk about Islamist terrorists, they're connected to something. I mean, look,
Right.
This book by this French white supremacist has been referenced by some of the Yellow Jackets protesting in Paris too. I mean, it can be sort of like a manifesto that is transnational in terms of impact. But even if you don't have that nexus, what is it that the FBI maybe could additionally be doing that it's not, or how, the interaction between local and federal law enforcement?
Yeah, well, the one thing the FBI can do is they can share information, and they do that. So if this individual is connected to other individuals, and there is some kind of suspicious activity, then the FBI can share that information. But if you have, we've been saying in the transnational Islamist terrorists, where there are very rarely lone wolves, and that's because there actually really, really are. I mean, one of the things we have at Heritage is a database, 100 plus Islamist-related terrorist attacks aimed at the United States since 9/11 that we study. And in very few cases are these people truly isolated and on their own. Mm-hmm. Usually they connect with somebody, but oftentimes in some of these radicalized shootings that we've seen, these actually are individuals. So unless law enforcement has connected with them in some way, or someone in the community is alerted to that, then there is a chance that there might not be any warning signs. We'll say this, and this is one area that really, really has changed. And the deaths in El Paso and Daytona are terrible, but look at how law enforcement responded. They got to the scene, they took down the shooter in less than a minute. That's called active shooter response. That is something that has become essentially the standard in the United States over the last 10 years. In previous situations, if you 2 decades ago, if there was a shooter, the first thing you would do is you go to the scene, you would secure the scene, and then you were worried about hostage taking. Now the presumption is if somebody's shooting, they're killing people, the sooner you get there, the sooner you stop them, the safer everybody will be. And this does reflect, I think, a real shift in law enforcement, and that has saved a lot of lives.
Hi, this is Charles here. Good morning. Good to talk to you. I have a question. I don't know what the answer is, but they're talking about taking down this site. Well, they took down the site, the 8chan. But
right.
We talk about how these people are interconnected, and I'm just wondering, does it really help long term? I get the emotion of it, but
right.
if they're getting together somewhere and we can track them, if we start taking all this stuff down, won't that make it harder to find them? We kind of make a mistake of assuming because somebody might have mental illness or they might be evil or whatever the case may be, that they're stupid people. So they're going to find a way to try to do this stuff. So shouldn't we kind of keep them where we know where they are, or do we take all this stuff down and help them push them underground, but they're still acting?
Well, that's a fair point, and it's a common part of the debate. And yeah, it's true that not just in domestic terrorism, transnational terrorism, that monitoring these networks often produces really valuable intelligence, which can be used to preempt and thwart attacks. Matter of fact, we have a long track record of that in the transnational terrorist community. In the United States, when we wrote the Constitution, we asked people, do you want liberty or do you want public safety and security? And they said, yeah, we want both, right? And so the Constitution doesn't say one priority is more important than the other. It says they're both of highest priority, figure it out. And so we have very clear laws in this country already on the books, the difference between kind of publicly acceptable free speech, which can be hateful and awful, and acts which actually constitute a crime or contributory to a crime. That line's already there, and I think we have to respect that. What I don't hear, or what's missing from the conversation, is they say, this person listened to this stuff and they radicalized online. And let's look at the number of people who maybe were exposed to similar language or sources and didn't become terrorists. Because the reality is terrorists are a tiny data set of anything other than other terrorists. And there is not a profile that says this is a bad person, because when you say, oh, well, look, he listens to this and he hates this politician. Yeah, okay, that's that terrorist profile. But you know what? I could probably give you 1 million people with the identical profile who've done everything the same, except they don't go out and shoot people in the morning.
Yeah, there's no question. But in terms of state and local versus federal, with respect to, I think New York City is about the only police department at the local level that has a counterterrorism unit. So if you're going to treat white supremacy as a domestic terror, there's domestic terrorist cells of white supremacists. Even if they're disparate and not great in numbers, small numbers can do great damage, as we know. Doesn't that really have to be a role the FBI fills?
Not necessarily. First of all, other major metropolitan areas have counterterrorism task force, and some states have it at the state level. So it's not just New York City, although New York City has the largest and robust CT of any city probably in the world. They even have liaisons in foreign countries. So when terrorist attacks happen, oftentimes they get intelligence on this before the CIA and FBI do. But in addition to major metropolitan areas having some of this capacity and capability, we do have what are called JTTFs, Joint Terrorism Task Force, which are led by the FBI, which includes state and local law enforcement, and don't just deal exclusively with transnational terrorism, also deal with domestic terrorism. So state and local authorities have access to this. I will say that the best way to stop a terrorist is to stop them before they attack anybody. And we've done an awful lot in this country, I think, in terms of best practices to really get on top of this problem in a practical way. I think public safety in large public areas is 1 million times better than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. Coordinated law enforcement response, way better. Coordinated disaster response, way better. And even plugging into the mental health community, and connecting that nexus where it's necessary between people who have legitimate mental health issues and access to guns and other things that might be dangerous and malicious. We've made a lot of stride. Much like it's interesting because a lot of the criticism I hear is people saying, "Oh, you're just focused on the terrorists, the foreign terrorists, and we're worried about this white supremacist." And these were the same people that 20 years ago they were against the Patriot Act. They were against the JTTFs. Matter of fact, in cities in this country, the JTTF has been banned because it's somehow perceived as being anti-Islamic. So I find it kind of ironic that all these things that they opposed in fighting transnational terrorism because of liberty and everything else, now because they're domestic terrorists, for some reason they want all these tools which they hated, which they now want to apply to domestic terrorists. And the problem is when you get in the domestic environment, I think we do have to worry about federalism. We do have to worry about civil liberties. It's not just about how can we stop the next shooting.
Yeah, there's no question. And I think those people that opposed those measures previously probably had less to do with liberty and a lot more to do with identity politics. But